Lovely to be here. I'm a pass out of ISB. I graduated in 2011 and largely have done impact investing. तो उससे अलावा ज़्यादा कुछ आता नहीं मुझे. I had a very interesting 4-5 years back. I had a session in ISB also around impact investing, and incidentally, this was the same question which was asked. So just to give you a sense, I represent Avishkar Capital. Avishkar is one of the first homegrown impact investor in the country. We started in 2002, so we have completed 2 decades of work in this area. Our first 5-6 years were very slow because we were trying to do venture capital and impact investment, so people were just mocking, laughing at us that we are being crazy, because at that time venture capital, even mainstream venture capital, was in more primitive stages. So most of the money was getting diverted to either Bangalore or NCR in tech-based startups. And in the midst of that, our founder was trying to raise capital to invest in villages. So it was a very radical kind of an idea which took its own time to shape up. But from that, when I joined Avishkar in 2012, we were managing around $24 million in assets. Today we manage about $550 million in assets. We are probably one of the few fund managers who have stepped outside India also and demonstrated impact investments potential in not just in India but overseas markets as well. And I personally have been part of investments in India, Indonesia, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka. So a broader kind of a regional, sectoral kind of an outlook of impact investments implementation in a wider geography. As an institution, now we invest in Asia and Africa. We have offices in India, Dhaka, Nairobi. So we have multi-region kind of a presence today. Just to go back to the question around impact investment, the interesting thing is that there is a very nice intersection happening between impact investment and the mainstream investment as we speak today. Some of the sectors which were traditionally only known as impact investment sectors have completely mainstreamed themselves. So just to take an example, yesterday there was an IPO of Utkarsh Small Finance Bank. This was a deal that I was also associated with, so very close to my heart. We tried to establish a microfinance company in a very underserved geography of Eastern UP. Eastern UP, as you would understand, is not the best of places to start a company. But we found a professional management team who could go out there, establish an institution which can serve underserved women credit requirements in that geography. And this was a seed to IPO kind of a story, which now I'm proud to say that we have been part of that 4 times now, where we seeded a company and then it went and got listed onto the stock exchange. So this itself tells you that at least there is some part of impact investment which has the potential to make money. So this is one example, but you will find that any developing market has lots of challenges which private sector entrepreneurs can actually address through a commercially viable and scalable model. And that is the whole essence of impact investment. Can you identify a real economy problem? Say a farmer not getting his dues, farmer not able to sow the plants properly, all the way to MSMEs not getting credit. There are so many challenges around you. You just have to look at a challenge. You have to find a business model that can work, and then you try to curate an institution so that that institution can become scalable. It can be funded by impact investors in the initial phase, and once the institution reaches a certain scale, widespread community of investors actually flock. Utkarsh was one of those examples where for the first couple of rounds impact investors backed them, but after that, because of the demonstration, it caught the attention of all the mainstream investors in the market, and they got supported by private equity ecosystem. They got supported by international DFIs, and then later on commercial investors at the pre-IPO stage, and now retail and institutional investors on the stock exchanges. And we believe that because the developing market issues are so deep, if you create enterprises which are solving for them through a scalable kind of model, you will really have billion-dollar revenue startups. So we don't believe in the unicorn concept. We believe in taking companies to billion-dollar revenue. That is the kind of goalpost that we chase. And because we are attacking such massive problems, we feel very excited that if you solve for those problems, you have a very reasonable chance of creating significantly large institutions which are creating not just commercial value, but also the societal value that those institutions stand for. So that's, in a nutshell, how we perceive the impact investment opportunity.
Thank you so much, Ashwath. That was very insightful. Samir, you could go next.
Sure. So I represent Unitas Capital, which is India's first impact-focused investment bank. Unitas started in 2008 as a way to help impact businesses raise capital. And over the last 15 odd years, it's raised about $4 billion in capital across all the clients we've supported. Within Unitas, I lead the climate practice. I also run Climate, which is an ecosystem for early stage climate startups, essentially. Now, coming to what lends to run impact investing, right? And why it's not philanthropy. I think that's an important distinction. Impact investing started as a way to essentially say, how can we invest in companies, I know as such as a real world problems, but also something that has a positive social outcome. I think that's where it started, right? If you go back 2004, 2005, most impact investors are focused on, in many different ways, thinking through, can we improve the income outcomes or the social outcomes for the excluded populations, the financially excluded? Can you provide them financial services? And that's where the most, I would say, successful form of impact investing, which is microfinance, came into existence. But also other interventions that improved livelihoods for people who were either in areas which had low livelihood outcomes at that point of time, better social structures, all of the above. Over time, it has evolved to include other things. But I would say that broadly at this point of time, most impact investors, and then their investors, their LPs, focus on either of the two outcomes, right? It's either a positive social impact or what I do, which is a positive environmental impact. The reason why this is not philanthropy is because for these models to scale and for these models to impact 1 billion people, they need to have capital. And philanthropic capital only takes you that far, which means that if you have to build scalable models, you have to build the businesses very similar to how a real business looks like. It cannot be, something that's always subsidized, because you don't build a business that goes to 1 billion people with subsidies. You can seed business with philanthropy, right? Which is what happens in a lot of cases, right? You get a technology grant to create a new technology, or you get a small grant from a foundation to set up a small pilot. But for that pilot to then become a real business, and for that business to then create significant impact at scale, it needs to have incentives for the people who are running it, which means it has to be profitable for the founders, and it needs to have incentives for people who are investing in it, because funds are eventually custodians of other people's money, and those people have return expectations. They may have a lower return expectation, often not, right? They're typically market expectations. But even somebody like a World Bank or an IFC, when they invest, want their money to be returned with some positive income on that, right? Which means that what you're essentially looking is the type of businesses who, at their core, and that's how we define our impact business, right? At the core, the mission is to build a scalable business that has a positive social or environmental impact.
Thank you so much. Anisha, would you like to go next?
I really don't know what else I can add after what they've both said. But yeah, I mean, to add to Simi's point about, there's only so much that philanthropic capital can get to. In my past role, I currently run a fund called Majority that intends to invest in startups that create better livelihoods. And we arrived at that thesis because we just came by a set of numbers, which basically said if you earn more than 25,000 rupees a month today, you're in the top 10% of all earners in the country. About 4 or 5 years ago, you would have been in the top 25% of all earners in the country. And of course, the purchasing power of the same 25,000 rupees has dropped in the same time. So we are looking at, if you were to stratify by income, you are looking at a reducing sort of segment that can afford most things, right? While on most human development indicators, India seems to be doing really well, and the extreme poverty has been reduced in the last 10 to 15 years. There is a very strong middle that isn't earning enough to create the markets that we want to. So in some sense, if you want to look at it, impact investing can help create markets for even stronger investors. Again, sort of going back to my past role, just before this, I was at the World Food Programme, which is the UN's largest voluntarily funded agency. So to her point about donations only going so far, WFP, unlike other UN agencies, gets its money from countries voluntarily giving over and above what they've promised to the UN Secretariat. And at that time was getting $10 billion a year to solve SDG 2, which is zero hunger. 821 million people go to bed hungry each night. That's 1 in 8 or 1 in 9 people. Okay, with $10 billion in our kitty, we couldn't solve the problem for more than 83 or 84 million people. Look at WFP reports every year, the number varies between 80 and 90 million. With 10 billion. So the division that I work for, which is called the World Food Programme Innovation Accelerator, was created to very literally accelerate the rate of change on SDG 2. Because if we kept doing things the way we did it, we wouldn't. So the point being that capital needs to be reinvested. Philanthropic capital is usually one way and goes down. Muhammad Yunus very famously once said, a social business dollar can be reinvested again, whereas a charity dollar only has one life. So that's one of the whole kind of logics behind impact investing.
Thank you so much. That was actually really helpful, and I think we all have a lot more clarity that impact investing needs to be commercially viable and is absolutely the need of the hour as well today. Moving on, in the last 10 years within India, we've seen a lot of new investment asset classes come up. Venture capital became really prominent in the last 10 years. Venture debt has now, really picked up, and now we're seeing impact investing also pick up as a new asset class for people to invest in. Since you all have all been part of the ecosystem within impact investing over the last decade, how have you seen the ecosystem evolve in the last 5 years? And if you all could also maybe share one success story of a past investment that you all have made, in terms of not just shareholder value that you all have been able to create through that, but also in terms of the impact that it has had in within the country.
Sure.
Maybe we can start with Hanisha this time, and then.
Sure. Can I give you a non-India example?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay, sure. So one of the startups that I started watching in about 2018 and put money in about 2020 is called Thrive Agri. They are YC summer, I think 2019. Thrive, when it started out in 2018, started out with 12,000 farmers. They essentially help people like you and me do better on their FD kind of on your debt investments by taking that money and giving it as a loan to a farmer. There are two similar business models in Africa that you should study if you haven't already. One is called One Acre Fund, and the other is called MyAgro. MyAgro, in fact, has done well enough that Bill Gates has written about it in a Gates note. But Thrive chose to sort of provide loans to farmers without the farmers seeing a single dollar in cash. So they would take money from like a peer-to-peer loan, but convert that into inputs, which is seeds, fertilizers, pesticides, etc. And give them a box of inputs, ask them to grow, and then have youth in the villages actually follow up. So the farmer themselves didn't need to invest in any kind of technology. There would be a young person in the village. And the key that they did very interestingly was that before the first seed was planted, they had contracts set up with the likes of Olam and Frito-Lay, etc., to actually buy the produce at a certain rate. So it's a combination of a peer-to-peer lending and an outgrower model, if you want to look at it that way. And like I said, when I started watching them, there were at 12,000 farmers. Today there are 600,000 farmers, $70 million top line, and over 2.5 million net profit. So doing pretty well.
Nice.
So
That's really
so I mean, it's possible. It's possible to generate scale. It's possible to generate have purpose. Each farmer that they have reached out to has seen an income improvement of at least 60%. So it's very possible to do both scale and profit and purpose.
That's really great. Simi, if you could go next.
Sure. So I think in terms of your question on how impact investing has evolved, I would say that in my mind it's become multimodal. What that means is that if you look 10 years ago, pretty much every impact fund has its objective as reduce poverty, right? At this point of time, I would say that there's a clear, not a distinction, but I think people have added to the thesis in that sense. Climate has emerged as one of the biggest themes that we've seen in the last 5 years. So if you look at the largest impact funds, let's call them that, but they're actually DFIs, the likes of IFC and ADB and all of the sovereigns based in Europe, they have really moved the needle to say we only want to do poverty elevation, to say we want to do that along with working on climate action. So that has become a major theme for most impact investors, as has gender. So at this point of time, I would say that if you had a business that was working on social outcomes, climate outcomes, and had positive gender outcomes, it'll get funded tomorrow, no questions asked. Like everyone would fund them, right? But I think that's essentially to say that it has also become more nuanced, right? Impact investors are no longer looking at, all we want to do is, there are lots of poor people, we want to kind of take out of poverty, right? They're also saying that there are multiple challenges that need to get solved, and depending on where our capital is coming from, because eventually a lot of funds essentially invest based on what they agree with their partners or their funders on what the focus of the fund would be, and the LPs have diversified to say, maybe this is not all we want to look at, we also want to look at gender equality. We also want to look at climate outcomes. So in fact, I'll give an example of one of our clients which actually checks all the 3 boxes. This is a company that's working with women micro-entrepreneurs, not women farmers. You probably know that a lot of women in Indian villages do not own land. They may work on the land, but they don't own land. They're not women farmers in that sense, and they're underemployed. So this company goes into villages to essentially set up on-farm or near-farm solar dehydration, and essentially provides financing or financing linkages for these women farmers to buy the dehydrator and increase their income by 2 or 3x every month. And then they actually buy back this produce of them, and then it goes to the Nestle to make your Maggi and all the little onion and capsicum that goes into the dried products that go into the Maggi. So they're creating this full ecosystem that is essentially creating positive gender outcomes, increasing the income for these women micro-entrepreneurs, but also you're not wasting food. You're also not transporting water, because when you're transporting vegetables and fruits, it's 90% water. So you're instead of dehydrating it and kind of improving the shelf life and reducing transportation costs. So significant climate outcome as well. We started working with them about 8 years ago when they were like a seed stage company. They've recently closed their Series A. We're now looking at raising their Series B. So incredibly successful. They started as a group of scientists. They were initially called Science for Society. They started as a group of scientists trying to find technologies to benefit humanity. And they realized over the course of several years that, well, that's great. For them to actually create impact, they have to pick a product and raise capital and sell the product. And that's where they've been successful.
Nice. So just to pick up on that, actually, since you mentioned an 8-year period, do you see the life cycle of an impact investment being far longer in terms of how long do you as a fund have to stay invested in that company? Because there is a time period that you have to return funds in, right?
It varies. I would say a lot of funds the AIF that it was set up,
Right.
do not actually have very long or much longer lives compared to a regular VC fund. They tend to be 8 to 10 year funds, so
Right.
slightly longer. But companies also, do secondary exits and then kind of get money from larger funds or PEs as they grow. But there is an increasing trend of, perpetual funds or longer tenure funds. There are funds set up, I would say, largely by, let's say, family offices who have more control on their capital, where they can set up longer tenure funds. But funds who are backed by, regular LPs like pension funds or insurance companies still tend to follow the norm of 8 to 10
8
year
to 10
funds.
years. Got it. All right. Thank you so much, Ashwath. If you could go next.
Yeah, so for us, what I have observed is that, when I joined the industry, it basically gave the feel that you're part of a very exotic kind of industry, very few people just trying to do something. But over time, that exoticness has come down, which is a good and a bad thing. So what happened, I'll tell you, I mean, candidly, initially what used to happen is that impact investor is doing something in agri. They'll probably support it once, twice, waiting for action to happen from commercial side. Nobody comes. So while you were alone and contended that you are the good guy, but you would want others to join in so that the startup keeps getting capital and they continue to grow. But that, there are two very unique things which we have seen happening. One is that there was a growing realization from the commercial VC ecosystem and PE ecosystem that these guys are building something unique and probably solid, very mission driven. So probably let's look at a few things. If they succeed, we can also jump the course and we can join them. So that was one angle. The other angle was when we actually started, the biggest problem for us was nobody was ready to move out of Bangalore and Delhi and Mumbai and go and set up these shops. So we have a company in Samastipur. If you go out in Samastipur and try to find a financial controller, your head will start spinning what is happening. So the talent was the biggest problem. When we started, there will be one passionate founder coming to our office saying that, I want to do this, I want to give back to my community. Somebody from Bhubaneswar saying that I want to give back to Bhubaneswar. Somebody from Varanasi will say I will give back to Varanasi. But how do you create an institution around it when the talent is just not ready to move? So initial 4-5 years, what we realize is just the most bizarre thing which is happening is you have good guys at the top, very well intentioned, very well meaning, but they are not able to build institutions. But once few success stories emerged, a lot of people realized that, this whole Bangalore life, Hyderabad life, Delhi life, Bombay life doesn't necessarily give you so much that you cannot consider these as opportunities. So talent also started coming in, and that's where. And then the third phase, I would say, is when the tech started coming in. So around 2013-14, we started seeing. Before that, everything that we had done in agri was completely brick and mortar. 2013-14 onwards, we started doing agri-tech. And after that, agri-tech has zoomed like how. There's so many agri-techs who have mushroomed across the country. So these three things have really evolved. As far as the ecosystem is concerned, ecosystem is always very opportunistic, right? So if you see a potent opportunity, whether you are an impact investor, whether you are a commercial investor, if it fits in your evaluation thesis, why will you not jump in? No commercial investor will reject an impact deal because it is colored as an impact deal. They will always jump in if they see the opportunity. So which is a beautiful thing. So last 4-5 years, we have seen a lot of tech VCs want to work with us because they say that you bring the knowledge on the operations side or non-urban, semi-urban, rural side. You have built so many businesses in those areas. You have networks and connects to build teams, etc. And we can help in on the tech side because we have done more on the product front. So there's been a nice collaboration also which has emerged over a period of time, and we have seen value creation happening in multiple companies of ours. We have a certain role to play from a portfolio management perspective, and the commercial mainstream tech VCs have their own role to play, and it's nicely working hand in hand. And it's great that now we have started losing deals to them because I mean earlier we were waiting for this to happen. We want to lose a deal. We want to lose a deal. Finally, it's happening. So it's a beautiful thing that you have to lose a deal in this.
But Shashwat, don't you think you guys also change colors, right? Because if you look at Avishkar 1 portfolio versus Avishkar 6 portfolio, Avishkar 1 was all Bleeding Hearts portfolio, right? Sequoia could not have invested in them
I
even
know.
if they wanted.
So we didn't have money here.
Yeah, but also I think.
So we took 6 years to raise our first $1 million.
Yeah.
So we were doing $30,000 check. If you go to Bangalore, even in those days, and with a $30,000 check, he'll say, "I won't even give you a meeting. Forget about anything else." So that time we were actually, our Avishkar 1 was a micro venture fund. Micro venture fund was meant ki there are small innovations happening across the country. Somebody is improving irrigation by 30%. Healthcare, there will be some tool which is helping the hospitals by 20%, 30%. So the tonality of that fund was very different. The idea was just to find guys who are passionate about innovation. Can we fund them? Through that fund, we built the entire back end of Fab India. So we had actually worked out a model in which the communities can get involved in the upside. And we funded 3 desert artisan groups in the northern belt. And these guys got then subsumed in Fab India, and we secured our exit through that. But today, a large part of Fab India's network is actually contributed by these desert artisan groups which came out of that fund. So some of those things actually went on to scale also, but many of those things were not necessarily, they were more experimental in nature. Today we don't need to do that because there is a very nice seed ecosystem, and now we can really support people at the stage at which we are raising Series A, Series B. There's a very good angel investment ecosystem, seed ecosystem. That time in that sector, nobody was ready to do angel seed.
I think that's the big change. Angels have come in, but I think also impact investors are now investing in deals that are actually commercially investable as well in many cases.
Absolutely. Following up on that, since you mentioned Fab India, I understand it was a much earlier investment made, but in that case, how do you really measure impact that has happened? In terms of, would it be like a qualitative or quantitative measure, just to sort of understand in agri-tech, climate tech, in livelihood, how would you really be able to measure impact? If there's any metrics that you would look at specifically.
Yeah, so it all varies deal by deal. Like in case of Fab India, though, when we had actually intervened, the status quo was basically chaos. So very easy to say I made impact. The moment you have said कि नहीं, people are getting salaries in bank account, that means you've got impact. So if the status quo is so poor or so weak or fractured, then justifying impact is one of the easiest things to do. But if status quo is not that unstructured, then obviously something very meaningful has to happen to make sure that your investment is really creating impact. So as Simi said, the initial few years were largely about, are they able to earn better? These are underserved guys. I mean, these artisans are underserved folks. Are they getting predictable income, and are they getting a reasonable quantum of income? Both those levers were super important. Thirdly, our founder also worked a structure where, are they also capable of getting some upside? That was the third angle where he actually applied some financial engineering around it. And so 3 levers there, but largely focused on income. And then, similar kind of yardstick you can keep applying to many impact investments. But as Simi said that, environmental impact is fairly important now. So that also you try and measure that which enterprises are definitely climate plus, which enterprises are climate neutral, which enterprises are climate negative. And you stay away from the climate negative zone. In climate positive zone, I'm sure Simi will be able to give you a better color, but even there are very defined yardsticks of how to evaluate the level of impact your enterprise is creating. In many cases, what will also happen is the founder has an intent to move in that direction. You work with the founder and chart out a course that in next 6-12 months you will move in that direction. But that direction has to make obviously financial sense from a scalability etc. perspective. So one of the things which is very important in impact investment is ki the impact thesis and the scalability thesis are very closely linked to each other. So, normal perception is that they will always be at loggerheads. An impact investor will say, you make impact. The guy will say, no, I want to do scale. Those conversations never happen because then that cannot be a portfolio company of an impact investor. So I think that is where a lot of confusion fades away. The moment you hear the business model, you are very closely able to evaluate how closely dealing these two things are. If they are not dealing, there is an inherent conflict, you stay away from it. If it is solvable, you solve for it and then get it.
Understood. But just coming from like an LP's perspective, while investing in an impact-focused fund specifically, is there anything that they look at in terms of the outcome that they're expecting?
They do.
As many LPs as people literally. So each LP might have each class of LP might have a very different outcome intent, right? There's a commercial intent, there's an impact intent. So if the LP is someone like a DFI, then they have a stated intent, usually countries define it. So like literally Ireland would have a different intent versus the US.
Yeah, but I think let's kind of look at how LPs or funds figure out what impact is, right? So basically impact allocation happens at two levels. There is a sector allocation, right? So when you kind of build a fund, you kind of say we're going to invest in A, B, C, D sectors, and you agree with your LPs that they are all impact, or they agree with what the LPs think is impact. Beyond that, I think it's a question of just aggregating the baseline for each of the investments and the progress they make, right? So for example, in climate, I think it's both easy and difficult. So climate action has two components. There's mitigation, which means reducing CO2 or greenhouse gases. And that's easy. There are standards around every segment of climate action. If you're putting solar, if you're switching to EV, if you are doing some farm productive changes or waste and circularity, how much CO2 or greenhouse gases do you save? That's easy. What's difficult is what's called adaptation impact. Adaptation basically means that no matter what you do today to solve for greenhouse gases, the world's gonna get worse. You're gonna get more disasters, you're gonna get more climate refugees, you're gonna get a lot of bad things happening over the next 20, 30 years, right? And how do you solve for that? Measuring that is tough, right? If somebody's building a disaster insurance platform, for example, how do you measure the impact for them? Again, then it becomes more nuanced in baseline versus what they actually achieve. Climate mitigation, I think, pretty much is standardized at this point of time.
Understood. Thank you so much for sharing that. And everything that you have mentioned on impact investing. I think everyone here has joined in for this one last question that I have with respect to anyone who is looking to pursue a career within impact. How should they really go about it? I think any of you all can take that up.
I can start and then please add in. I mean, there are three ways, right? I see it. The toughest but the most impactful one is build a business. Go start an impact startup, right? Start a climate startup or a livelihood startup. Find an opportunity that nobody else is solving for and solve for it. But if that's not where you're headed, I think there are two other ways, right? One is to essentially work on the capital or the supply side for impact, which is to work not just in an impact fund, and there are many of them, probably hundreds of them today, but advisory, mentoring, accelerator, there are multiple such opportunities. The other potentially less obvious one is working with large corporations, because large corporations, and I'm not talking about CSR, impact is becoming integral to large corporations. At this point of time, pretty much every large company in the world is a signatory to the Net Zero Alliance, which means that they have targets to reduce their greenhouse gas emissions to zero by a certain date, 2030 or 2025 or whatever they've chosen. Which means that there are people working in those companies to implement projects that get them to net zero. So that's the third way. Probably many more, but I think a good starting point would be to basically educate yourself on what all is happening, right? There is so much happening in the world of livelihood, social impact, climate, and in a country like India, there really is, a huge amount of opportunity as we see from here. But if I were you and if I wanted to create the most impact, I would say build a business.
Yeah. Great advice. So, Hanisha, would you like to go next?
Yeah, so I'm probably the newest entrant to the impact side anyway. I was on the for-profit, not clearly for benefit kind of side till about 2018. So I can probably answer that best. So I started small. I found a business that I liked and started consulting with them, pro bono. Then grew that. This was about 2014. Couple of hours a month. Then went up to a couple of hours a week. Tried to understand the issues around me enough to at least figure out what issues I want to, I care about enough. So, and then, it's been a long journey. It took me about 4 more years to decide that, okay, it's hunger and poverty that matter the most. And that's where the stint at the World Food Program came in. And again, the whole point was that, so having built businesses on the internet side of things at scale, I was previously a product manager and a growth marketer at Make My Trip, at Tata Click, at Airtel Money. So, just knowing that, okay, I have these skills and I care about these issues can be a fairly decent starting point to say, okay, what's the fastest way that I can make an impact? I mean, as opposed to, okay, what's the largest impact I can have today? So that's how I began. In fact, the S4S founders, and it's interesting you mentioned that
They're part of World Food Program.
Yeah, they were on my watch list for a while. But so I also liked their approach. So they were fresh out of college when they decided the solar dryer startup that Simi mentioned. They were fresh out of college and they had a bunch of BSc degrees or MSc degrees or whatever. They just went out and observed the world around them. And they said, okay, what are the problems that we see? And for example, they went to a mandi and they saw that farmers could afford to bring produce to the mandi, but didn't have, if they weren't selling that produce, they didn't have enough money to carry weight back. So they would essentially dump fresh, saleable produce by the side of the road. And this happens in markets all around the world. This is not new to India or unique to India. The fact that they decided to take that problem statement, so it literally tells you, in a country like India, is spoiled for choice to make an impact. Just observe the world around you, figure out something that you care about enough, and start. I would just say that.
Sure. Thank you so much. Shaswat, would you like to go next?
Yeah, so for me, I mean, everyone will have different reasons, but for me, initially, when I looked at the Avishkar website, I was fascinated that you get to travel to rural areas. My family, large part of my family still lives in a village, and I'm very fortunate that Avishkar has touched my village. Three of my companies work in my village, so I'm one of the I feel very grateful for that. But I think, after spending about 11 years, I can say that if you look at just the impact investment side of things, there has to be a very strong alignment of your interests and what the sector demands. It is not a one-size-fits-all kind of a thing. Despite growing to a certain level and despite creating a brand in this space, I would say it still has its pros and cons compared to any other commercial venture capital opportunity. So what you should do is, for sure, spend some time meeting people who have spent considerable amount of time, understand the nuances of what works, what doesn't work, what are the kind of things you need to keep in mind. Because in many cases, what I've realized is that, from outside it appeals as such a beautiful combination of capitalism and goodness and all that. But if it doesn't fit your style of working, your style of thinking, I've seen people who have joined in within 6 to 12 months, they didn't particularly like that vis-a-vis whatever they prefer in their professional capacity. So that initial legwork is, I think, very critical to understand what you like and what the industry demands, and then take a view whether you would want to pursue that as a potential career.
So you're essentially saying that working in a normal venture capital fund is very different.
Very
from-
different from that.
In terms of
Yeah, because see, it'll at some level there are some guardrails, right? When you look at a commercial venture capital ecosystem, you can pretty much look at anything, support any kind of businesses as long as the numbers stack up. This is multi-layered, so this is numbers stacking up, impact thesis stacking up, climate thesis stacking up. So if you are okay to deal with that kind of a complicated scenario, and that what that also does is the impact investors don't do those many deals as compared to the commercial VCs, right? And if you are a momentum kind of a fellow that you want to do 5, 6, 7 deals a year, this may not be the best place for you. Those are the obvious sort of challenges that you will encounter invariably, and that is what you need to keep in mind.
I must say that people are nicer. So I spent 15 years doing mainstream banking. So I was in Morgan Stanley for almost 10 years. And I actually made the switch to impact investing at the same place as Shaswat, actually, the IntelliCap Avishkar group. And I must say that all the anchors of impact investing in India today, right? Avishkar, Grameen, Uniters have seeded many people who actually form the impact investing industry today. And they're just nice people.
I mean, a year ago, I was about 3 months into our fundraise, and I sent, Vineet was a common introduction. I sent my pitch deck, my LP pitch deck to Vineet, and literally within half an hour, he had a slide by slide, input on, okay, don't ever promise
Half an hour
this.
is actually too much for him.
Yeah, yeah.
It's 5 minutes.
Yeah, but it's really nice. Great industry to be in, no doubt about that.
And very close-knit still, even though it's kind of expanded and there are hundreds of funds today, still I think most of us know each other who have been around for a long time. It's a pretty close-knit industry.
That's so nice. Thank you so much. So I'm done with my questions, but Ramya has something fun planned for all of you.
All right. So thanks, Nehal, for driving those conversations. All right. So we got an opportunity to get to know about impact investment now. Would you like to know a little more about our speakers? Yeah. So this is going to be a little fun stuff. The idea is very simple, rapid fire questions. So we've kept some formal and some informal questions, real formal and informal questions. And since it's rapid fire, I will be asking good 8 to 10 questions to one speaker and then go on, so on and so forth. So the question is, who wants to go first?
Nobody.
I can see.
My mind is
Everyone
only thinking
is-
about
I think
the
we can do
hamper.
similar.
There's a hammer for
I have already told I'm the slow guy. Slow
Simi,
fire.
shall we start with you?
All right.
You have the mic with you and I can see the hand mic with you. All right, so are we ready?
Yes.
All right, so let's do this.
Yes.
Okay, environmental impact or social impact?
Environmental for me.
All right. Renewable energy or educational initiatives?
That's a tough one. Both, preferably.
Okay. A real tough one here. Profit or purpose?
Both. That's for sure. You can have both.
Beautiful, beautiful. Okay, very informal question here, but sushi or tacos?
Sushi.
Right. How many in for sushi here? There you go. So you got them as well.
Vegetarian sushi. So
All right. Okay, the next one. Are you into either comedy club? Do you enjoy that, or live music concert?
Comedy.
Comedy. Huh? All right then. Winter, summer. I'll not ask about the monsoons, especially in Bombay. So winter or summer, if there's some winter in Bombay.
Winter. I live in London and I love the weather. Nobody loves London weather. I love London weather.
All right then, great. City life or country living?
City.
City. Okay, there. Gender diversity or racial diversity per se in the portfolio companies. What is it that you focus more?
I think both are overrated. As fund allocators, we hope to achieve those outcomes, but you're eventually wanting to back the strongest businesses.
Beautiful, beautiful. Last two questions. Twitter or Instagram?
Or threads.
Or threads, or
I'm not-
LinkedIn, I guess you're on.
Yeah, LinkedIn actually. I'm mostly on LinkedIn.
True that. All right, and finally, financial inclusion or healthcare initiatives.
I think both go hand in hand. I think one is an outcome of the other.
True. Lovely. All right, thank you, Simi. All right, so Shashwat, I'll give it to you next, and then we will go to Anisha. All right, so next one. Climate change mitigation or the whole biodiversity conservation?
Oh, that's the second one is very tough. So climate is the answer.
Got it. All right. Impact bond investments or direct equity investments?
Equity investments.
Equity. All right. Again, impact measurement or impact reporting?
Measurement.
Measurement as such. All right. Okay. So let's now make it a little more fun. Board games or video games?
Oh, that's a tough. Video games.
Video games. How many video game lovers over here? I can see those hands up there. All right, sir. There we are with you as well. Okay. Short-term impact with lower returns or long-term impact with higher returns?
Long-term impact with higher.
Clearly, I think it was quite evident in the
Yeah.
conversation.
Which mistake over
Yeah.
All right, great. Emerging markets or developed markets?
Emerging.
I thought so as well. I think the conversation is very
Yeah.
evident when you mentioned that as well. Okay, this one is technical, but you focus on poverty elevation or environmental conservation?
Poverty elevation.
All right. Tough one, guys. Marvel or DC?
Oh, I'm not into both. Actually.
Both. I think that's a safe answer.
So none.
I think that's a safe answer right now. Because you'll have a
I'm
clear.
with Chacha Chaudhary and Billu.
With you on this. Chacha Chaudhary?
Here too.
There
Yes.
you go. All right, so a few more questions coming up. Given a choice, road trip or cruise? Road trip. Impact funds or direct investments? The same one.
Or direct investments.
Yeah,
Direct investments.
direct investments. All right, and finally, dance or singing?
Dance. I'm a dancer in my own.
There you go. We love that. All right, thank you. All right, so with that, let's move on to Hanisha. Let's start with socially responsible bonds or green bonds.
Socially responsible.
Lovely. Okay. Education initiatives or vocational training programs?
Vocational training programs, if they lead to income enhancement, not arbit skilling. Like, let's create 500 hairdressers per district and we don't know what to do with them.
True that. Okay, all right. Sustainable agriculture or waste management solutions?
One feeds into the other in many ways. So yeah, both.
Both. All right then. An informal one, but museums or art galleries?
Museums.
Impact measurement tools or impact evaluation studies?
Measurement.
Measurement tools, I said. All right. Okay. Online shopping or in-store shopping?
Neither.
Neither. Okay then.
Shopping gives me a headache.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Wow.
That's a new one.
And I work for an
That's
e-com.
incredible.
All right then. Water conservation projects or affordable sanitation solutions?
Water conservation.
Water conservation. Ethical supply chain practices or fair trade investments?
Ethical supply chain.
Beautiful. Impact venture capital or impact private equity?
Impact venture capital.
Okay. Given a choice, skydiving or bungee jumping?
Skydiving.
Wow, that came. Anyone
That
here?
came really
Yeah,
quickly.
yeah, some of us are there. Yeah, there you go. Yeah, we also have scuba diving happening out there. Awesome. Great then. A tough one, guys. Android or iOS?
Android.
Okay, how many Android lovers?
Impossible.
My second device was always a sub $100 device.
Got it. Got it.
How else would you test?
True that. Okay then. Two more to go. Comedy shows or thrillers?
Comedy.
Comedy there. Okay, and finally, technology for financial inclusion or healthcare access?
Financial.
Financial inclusion.
You give people enough money, they'll figure out the rest.
True that, right? Yeah. Super. Thank you so much. All right, that was a very quick, rapid fire with the three panelists. We'll now have the floor open. If there are any questions that you wish to ask, please do let us know, and you can in fact ask specific panelists as well. So let's have the floor open. If there are any questions online as well, we would request you to share them. My colleague Ami will also take a look. Yes. Hi. You have a question?
Yeah.
Yes, please. Could you also introduce yourself so that they'll have my.
Okay, I'm Saloni. I'm the content head at Sociobits,
Okay.
and I have a question for you. So, is there any SDG that is most beneficial
Any particular SDG?
Is it for one of us?
Either one of you can take that. Or was it for any specific panelists? Or?
No, anyone can answer.
Yeah, I mean, I keep forgetting the numbers, but the ones on climate impact. You are two.
SDG 1, 2, yeah, 1 and 2.
And Sasha.
Yeah, economic growth. There's something on.
Decent work in economic growth.
Yeah.
The most important SDG is SDG 17.
Okay.
Joint collaboration towards all the goals.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Fair enough.
Thank you so
All right.
much.
Thank you, Saloni. All right, yeah, I think, we have Saloni there as well. Yes, please.
Hi, I'm Saloni again. I have a question for Shashwat. You mentioned if the status quo is fractured, it's easier to show returns while you do impact investing. What happens if it's not? So you spoke about 3 levers, right? Income, and if you can elaborate on the same.
Yeah. No, so what I meant was that if the status quo is fractured and you try to do a private sector enterprise oriented intervention in that, then impact thesis becomes very easy to justify. Returns is not easy. If it is fractured, it's really hard to make it organized. I mean, anything which is super unorganized and you're making it organized is a hard battle to fight. But if you're successful in doing that, then you can potentially create a lot of economic and impact value. So that is always the go-to kind of a zone for an impact investor. That you identify those areas which are very hard to solve for. You put a gestation time to that. You put proper talent, technology at play, and institution, and then try to attack that and make a difference.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I think we have a question here from Prashant.
Hi, my name is Prashant. First of all, congratulations on your journey till this place and wish you all the best for the future ahead.
Thank you.
My question is this impact investment or the impact business all around has a lot of policy dependencies, and how much that policy impacts your decision versus the growth in this sector, because this is now emerging and government is putting out a lot of new schemes also. How does that affect your journey or the sector as a large, and how do you navigate through that?
I'll take a stab at it, but please add. But I think from our perspective, we would not back a business where future growth or the investment outcomes are dependent on a future policy change, right? So as investors, most impact investors like policy clarity, which means that if they're investing in a fintech, they want to have a reasonable level of clarity what the policy is and a hope that policy will not change over their investment horizon, or not change in a way that really impacts their investment. So that's one, right? So having policy clarity is great. Where policy is still evolving, most investment decisions are made on assuming that policy is as it stands today, which basically means that if a business was built largely on subsidies, we would typically evaluate whether the business makes sense without subsidies or not. Because no business can survive forever on subsidies. That said, positive policy developments, right? For example, you've seen a lot happening in waste and circularity in the last 2 years. New EPR norms, new contracts for clearing out landfills, for example. They are a push for companies to grow, and then they become investable. So that's great, right? So which is why I would say stable policy is a requisite for most investors to come in. If positive policy has happened, that makes companies more investable. But nobody would invest hoping that a future positive change will happen.
I think I also wanted to take a couple of examples. A very interesting question, actually. As I told you, that Avishkar Group, when we started, was way ahead of its time, because the ecosystem was very nascent, and hence Avishkar Group took that approach that why don't we have a multi-pronged approach? Why don't we will not just become a venture capital investor, we will also have an advisory arm, investment banking arm. We'll organize conferences. A lot of things we started doing. And what we realized is that this ecosystem approach becomes super important to pave the ground. For example, when microfinance crisis came in, the industry was in complete disarray. The entire Andhra portfolio had completely sunk. We basically, what we did is we first of all realized that an industry body is super relevant at this stage. All the stakeholders have to come in together, they have to do consultations, they have to make formal representations to RBI on how to make this industry well identified by the regulators and solve for whatever concerns are there from the government side or from the financial institution side, and try to come up with frameworks. MFIN got created out of that. And you know, what MFIN has delivered for microfinance industry is unparalleled, because you know, the complete disorganization of the industry by having a sledgehammer kind of a blow which happened in Andhra Pradesh. Within 2 years, because of the kind of work that MFIN did with the regulators, they were able to repair the industry very significantly, come up with formal guidelines from Reserve Bank of India, and make the industry more scalable, much more scalable compared to what it was in its yesteryears. It was much more fair as an industry subsequently. So I think that is one example. It's not necessary that every impact investor will get into that, but I took that example because that is something which has already happened. Similarly, what happens is, you know, most impact investors try to create some kind of a representation from time to time to the relevant ministries and all, so that they know what are the pain points that startups are actually telling, and at least there is some consultation which is happening, so that the government is aware when they are coming up with some new regulations. They are aware and they can use those inputs to devise policies in a fit and proper kind of a manner. So there is a role, yes, while but as Simi said, you won't bank on it when you are evaluating the proposal, that I will do it with the hope that in 2 years so and so things will come in. It won't. I mean, that's a very dangerous zone to operate in.
Yeah, and I think all things being equal, any investor would rather invest in a business that can succeed without subsidies or policy intervention.
Yeah.
One there, one here. So I think we've got just 2-3 questions. I'll first hand it over to him. Hi, could you introduce yourselves, please?
Sure. Hi, it's Christian from BCD. I have a question. You traditionally raise capital primarily from investors, or rather, you know, sovereign funds and all of these outside India. But do you see that tide changing with India becoming a middle-income country, more tech millionaires coming out of India? Do you see that capital being raised within India as well?
Absolutely.
Anisha, you're raising
Yeah.
capital. You have the
Yeah,
most
yeah.
up-to-date information.
We're doing a first close purely on domestic capital, purely on startup entrepreneurs that made it well. So yeah, hopefully the answer will continue to be yes for a while now.
Great, because the question was also from what I was listening to Shashwat, and he was mentioning about some of these problem statements that you're solving through this is something that is relevant for a lot of businesses in India today,
Yeah.
as they target the next billion, right? These
Yeah.
semi-urban areas, the urban areas, and do you see these more active investors coming in the form of strategic investors, right? Not just giving you money and getting away from it, but maybe trying to understand what's happening on the ground as well.
Yeah. So it's absolutely happening. So, you know, just to take that example, we were also 80-85% DFI 10 years back. Today we are barely 30-35% DFI. Everything else is largely Indian capital. These large corporate houses who want to really, through us, they want us to be their eyes and ears for these new sectors which are coming up, the rural, semi-urban story which is shaping up. So, and in many of those cases, they also invest alongside us. So, they will not just invest in our fund vehicle, but they will also opportunistically look at startups. They would join some of the rounds which are happening in those startups. So, it's happening in a big way. Everyone has realized that, you know, startup is a very massive opportunity. Within that, impact ecosystem is also growing very, very quickly. And there are always very promising opportunities to take direct exposures also. And you get access to those deals through participation in some of these impact funds. So that realization is very much there, and we have seen that tide really shifting very quickly.
And see, the whole trend of Bharat being the key consumer area, I mean, it has been going on for a while now. nearly every e-com player in the country will tell you that over 60% of all revenue comes from Bharat. If a Kolhapur has enough money to have an Audi and a BMW store, then there are many such pockets of wealth in the country, and they may not literally have the same opportunities as us to invest in many other vehicles. So you do see even LPs coming from tier 2 India. So we're seeing quite a lot of that.
All right, so I'll hand it over to Abhishek. Yes, you have a question.
First of all, thank you so much for your viewpoints. It is definitely enlightening and helping us understand more. As the subject is on the impact investments, I understand that it has to be balanced between the impact that your investment creates as well as profitability. The question is, how do you maintain the balance of it when you select where to invest, and how do you maintain that balance? Because losing that balance is easy, but maintaining it is difficult.
I think one of my first investees asked me this, saying, if you're looking at a startup that can improve incomes, then wouldn't Meesho be an impact investment by that logic? My point is, yeah, probably by some lenses, yes. But if, like you rightly said, so we've had endless debates on whether the idea is to optimize for profit or optimize for purpose. Eventually, we do have to realize that the end goal is not profit, endlessly maximizing profit. While we are looking at creating significant shareholder value, we are not saying we create endless profit, and therefore, that balance is something you have to test for in your founders. There's not much more you can do beyond that point. In the sense, are they looking at so the extreme first world example, Amazon creating a set of multimillionaires, and then having significantly sort of abhorrent practices on paying people at the bottom of the pyramid, the last mile, the delivery drivers in every country that they have existed in. Do we want to create the replica of that kind of a business? Is a question we have to jointly ask between the investors as well as the founders, to say, okay, where are we finding that sort of optimum between profit and balance? The answer varies from case to case, really.
Yeah, but that said, there are enough processes in place. I think every fund has pretty extensive environment and social diligence processes, which makes sure that you're not investing in a profit at all cost company. You're investing in mission-driven founders only. So there's a lot of checks and balances in place, starting from LPs, but also the fund processes and diligence processes.
So we have a question over here. Yeah, hi. Would you want to introduce yourself as well?
Hi, my name is Morishree. I'm from the founding batch, so I feel pretty old. But first of all, I want to just say that I really enjoyed listening to all of you. It was a very engaging discussion. I also work with the Piramal Foundation, and Piramal Foundation actually works across these three sectors, which is education, health, and climate. And the question that I had, maybe it's a little bit nuanced, but what I wanted to understand was that in social impact, the impact is a long time gestation, right? When you're talking about educational initiatives or even climate for that matter, it's like a 10-year period is the first thing that they will say कि 10 साल से पहले तो आपको इसका intervention का कुछ impact दिखेगा ही नहीं. So how do you, and so that's one reality. The other reality is, if you are an impact investment fund that is looking at some kind of a commercial return also, which is how you are different from a philanthropic foundation kind of thing. So how do you navigate between these two? Because then how do you do that? That's my question.
So I guess you don't define your end goal as a successful intervention. You define your end goal as a step change, right? And a series of step changes, which means that you know that as an 8-year fund or whatever structure that you're in, you can achieve a certain amount of impact, right? And for every investment you made, you kind of figure out what that end goal will be. Right? It's not going to make your investments, let's say as a climate investor, your investments are not going to make greenhouse gases zero tomorrow, right? Or in 5 years. But can you contribute to X tons of CO2 mitigation? I think that's how you define your outcomes.
So it's incremental,
It's
take incremental,
incremental
take
from a
baselines,
baseline,
take
yeah.
end lines, and
I can give you the nutrition parallel. So, for example, at WFP we used to do school meals for about 12 million children globally. And the fact, if there is a child in some country going to a primary healthcare center, and so there are two kinds of malnutrition that could happen, which is SAM and severe and moderate. So moderate we used to handle, which means the child is well enough to be treated with food, possibly therapeutic food, right? Now the point is, can we measure as a population the number of children making it to a healthcare center over a 1 year period, 2 year period, as opposed to a 10-year period, as you're saying, and then say the reduction in the percentage of population of children under 5 making it to a healthcare center for moderate malnutrition, and also eventually the specific degree of malnutrition, the height, the weight, the upper middle arm circumference, actually reducing. So you can come down to specific indicators that say, okay, this indicator needs to reduce by say 5% over the next 2 years, as opposed to saying, okay, let's abolish malnutrition from this country.
Yeah, I think there are two things. One is suitability of vehicle, the investment vehicle through which you are investing. If it's a timed vehicle of 8 years, 10 years, there are obvious constraints. We are service providers, but we can't serve them all. That's one thing which is certainly there. When we entered the industry, we were always questioned on exit. So we have been really, really focused on exit. Whenever we enter an investment, the first question our internal team focuses on is exit. And hence we have been able to deliver 40 exits so far, which is a rarity. Most people are holding it for a very long time. At the same time, what that does is that obviously some models which have a long gestation period will not fit the bill in that. The question will get asked is that, can we try to leapfrog? Is that a real possibility? But in sectors like agri and all, we have realized that there's no point in leapfrogging. If you try to grow an agri enterprise at 200% year-on-year growth, it will break. It's not the right thing to do. So those are the institutional learnings that we try and apply and see, and that's why you'll see the portfolio also gets constructed in a certain way, certain kind of models get left out. But for areas like climate, we are raising a fund which is 15-20 years in term as well. Because we realize that there's no point. If you raise a 10-year fund for that kind of an intervention, it won't make sense. So right vehicle and then, selective kind of deal.
All right, so we have one last question. We're cognizant of the time, so I think we've got both of you. I'll just hand it over to him first. He's asked us. Akshay, please go ahead.
So, hi, my name is Akshay Tripathi. My question would be relevant to carbon emission and net zero impact target that we are having in countries. So, I'm looking towards what is the quantum of funds when we are looking from the impact investment, and why I'm telling where I'm coming from is I'm from an automobile industry where we are deploying EV buses all across the country, right? So, there's a huge amount of fund which is currently being required to deploy because the cost of the product is. So I'm looking in terms of what is the quantum of money or in investment if we are as an OEM and so do impact investment partners or the firm partners with OEMs also, or do you only look for startup or something like that?
So it depends on the vehicle. So I think these two obviously only invest. We, because we're advisors, can work on a more broad series of investments because we essentially bring in other lenders. But to answer your question, I think at this point of time, if you are looking for funding for EV buses and you have, revenues tied up or, revenue streams tied up, there's no shortage of capital. There is so much money for EV out there. Just to put things in perspective, last year, climate investments, which is just money that went towards renewables, EVs, all of the above, was about $22 billion just in India. So it's a huge quantum of money. There is no dearth of capital.
And that comes under impact investment.
Yes.
Depends on who's measuring.
Yes.
The Impact Investors Council said that it was about 7 billion that went to impact investments in the country. So yeah, depends on who's measuring.
Yeah.
I'll keep it open for one last question. Yes, please. Please go ahead. Yeah.
Good evening. I'm Divya, also founding class, and I'm so glad I happened to be in town and I attended this. It's very interesting, very engaging discussion. I'm currently based in Africa and I've often talked to Africa. So I'm just curious, what are so do managing funds, from what I understand, and I apologize if I misunderstood this. But who's investing? How are you raising capital? You mentioned there is capital is awash, it's flooded. So I'm just curious, how sophisticated are your investors? I mean, who's putting in money and how are you raising
Capital is not a wash.
Capital is not a wash.
Yeah.
I think we would have
Climate capital. We might have missed
Climate capital is.
Climate capital is.
Other issues sometimes not. Yeah.
Just curious, I mean, and what are they looking for? I mean, how do you raise?
So just to clarify, these two are funds. I am an investment banker, so I organize funds. But yeah, where's your capital coming from?
Yeah, so
So the whole continuum, right?
yeah, so there are
This, you mentioned something about it shifting 85% DFI earlier to
yeah.
20% DFI.
So that has moved a lot. So initial years it was a lot of European development institutions, people like Rockefeller Foundation, who wanted to test some impact investments in developing markets, and they had some specific pools of capital for that. And over time, their pools have also enhanced because there has been a certain kind of a track record that Indian funds have been able to deliver to them. But what is more heartwarming is this whole local capital which has started to emerge. The whole startup story and exit story across commercial and impact investments have drawn a lot of attention. So a lot of high net worth individuals, corporates, they have also started paying attention to that. Now their motives could be disparate. Some of them will be there to make some money, but many of them are also there to support something very novel in the developing economy, the challenges which the developing economy poses. But it's broad, but it's always capital raise is one of the hardest things to do in this industry. But if you continue at course, you are able to stay true to what you stand for. There is a reasonable chance that over time people trust you and people are able to back you repeatedly, and hence your capital raise journey becomes that much more efficient.
All right, then I am sure that there will be more questions, but we'll probably take that offline, just being cognizant of the time for all of us here as well. So firstly, thank you so much for joining us. Firstly, thank you to the three of you. I think it's truly been a very insightful and an engaging session as well. Thank you to all of you who have stayed back for the session, and to our alums. All of you have joined us, and I think it's been beautiful to watch you all smile over the answers that were coming up from here. But before we close it, we have something, as you mentioned about the hamper, we do have something that we wish to give. No, we truly would want to give something that's handmade and hand woven from our side. So I'm going to request Ankit and Ami to do the honors, but we'll first give out.
I thought the hamper went to one person.
I think we all loved all of their answers. It's unanimous. Going to Hanisha, starting with Hanisha. So we're giving you a hand-woven sari from Kalanika, which is my brand though. And so that's a hand-woven sari. What Simi is receiving is a hand-painted sari, and we all know which brand that is from.
Yes.
It comes from Flash Brush Strokes by Pooja, which is she also happens to be Dean's wife. It's a beautiful hand-painted sari that's come to you. And a hand-painted scarf that's coming to Shashwat, again from the same brand. That's Flat Brush Strokes by Pooja. We have Ankit and Ami handing over the gift, so thank you so much. And thank you so much once again for joining us. If there are any questions offline, please do connect with our speakers if you do have some little time to connect with them. And thank you once again.
Great.
I hope it's been a great evening for all of you. Thank you all for who have also joined us online. Thank you once again. See you.
Recording stopped. Recording in progress.
Yes, they can. Pictures as a matter.